The dry Texas wind kicked up a fine dust as the black stallion reared violently in the center of the training ring. His hooves slammed against the packed dirt, his muscles coiled like a loaded spring. The crowd of seasoned ranchers sitting on the wooden bleachers didn't flinch. They had seen this before. Midnight's Promise, they called him. A horse with fire in his blood and a look in his eye that dared anyone to try and break him. And so far, every man who had tried had hit the dirt in less than 3 minutes. They came with ropes, whips, and steel in their voices, but left with bruises and silence. Midnight wasn't just untrained, he was angry. There was something behind his eyes, something wild and wounded, as if he remembered every blow, every betrayal. The animal was feared, cursed, and whispered about in late-night talk at the feed store. And now, as the sun beat down on the arena, a new figure stepped into the ring. She wasn't what they expected. Emily Grace Aldridge didn't wear spurs. She didn't carry a whip. Dressed in a light chambray shirt and faded jeans tucked into well-worn boots, she moved with quiet certainty, her blonde hair tied back, her gaze fixed on the stallion. Some of the older men chuckled under their breath. Sheriff Wade Hale leaned forward, arms crossed, already half expecting to step in when things got ugly. But Buckland Rourke, her grandfather, said nothing. He just watched, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed under the brim of his hat. Emily stopped a few feet from Midnight. The horse snorted, pawed the ground, his black coat shimmering with sweat and tension. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just breathed, slow, steady. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, she took one step closer. Midnight flinched but didn't bolt. He was watching her. Really watching. As if something about her presence didn't threaten him, it confused him. "You're not the first to be scared," she said softly, her voice barely louder than the wind. "But I'm not here to fight you." The crowd couldn't hear her words, but they felt the shift. Midnight lowered his head slightly. Not submission, but attention. Something in him was listening. Emily didn't raise her rope. She let it hang at her side, a symbol of choice rather than control. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her breath calm, steady. The horse took a step forward. Gasps rippled through the bleachers. Evelyn Calloway covered her mouth with her hand. Buck's knuckles went white as he gripped the edge of the bench. Emily extended her hand, palm open. The stallion hesitated, then took another step. For the first time in years, Midnight's Promise didn't rear or bolt. He stood there, between fear and trust. And Emily didn't move a muscle. Not yet. Because she knew this wasn't just about the horse. It was about everything she came back to face. Her past, her father, and the truth that no one in Redstone County had dared to speak out loud, not for nearly 2 decades. The barn was old, weather-beaten, and heavy with the scent of hay, dust, and time. Emily stepped inside just after dusk, the wooden floor creaking beneath her boots. Moonlight slanted through the open loft window, casting long shadows over the walls. Midnight stood in his stall, calm but alert, his ears twitching as she approached. She paused at the gate, not from fear, but from memory. This barn had once belonged to her father. Every beam, every rusted nail, still whispered with his voice. "Samuel Aldridge built this place with his own hands," came a voice behind her. Evelyn Calloway stood near the doorway, her gray hair tucked under a straw hat, her eyes sharper than most folks half her age. He was the only man that horse ever trusted, and some say the only one who truly understood what he carried inside. Emily nodded but said nothing. Her fingers traced the edge of the gate as she looked at Midnight. "He never talked about this horse," she murmured. "Not once. Not to me." "That doesn't surprise me," Evelyn said, stepping closer. "Your father was a good man, but he carried more pain than most could see. He kept secrets, especially from those he loved. Midnight's Promise. That horse was more than a partner. He was a mirror. Emily leaned against the stall, the weight of the past pressing down on her chest. She remembered the night the letter came, the one that told her Samuel was gone. No funeral. No goodbyes. Just a sheriff's report and an estate left in silence. She had spent years convincing herself that some truths were better left buried. But now, face to face with the animal that had once been her father's shadow, she wasn't so sure. Behind her, Evelyn watched carefully. "You came here for more than the horse," she said quietly. "You're looking for something, aren't you?" Emily turned to face her. The moonlight caught in her eyes, exposing the vulnerability beneath her calm. "I'm looking for answers," she said. "Why he shut me out. Why he died alone. And why, after all these years, this horse still acts like he's waiting for him to come back." A long silence filled the barn. Then, from the shadows, another voice joined in. "You won't find peace digging through old ghosts," said Sheriff Wade Hale, stepping in through the side door. "Sometimes the past stays buried for a reason." Emily didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her jaw set. "Then maybe it's time someone unburied it." The sheriff held her stare for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Just make sure you're ready for what you find, Miss Aldridge. Redstone's got a long memory. And not all of its kind." Emily turned back to Midnight, who watched her in silence, still and unreadable. Somewhere in that silence, she felt it. The past hadn't finished speaking. Not yet. And she wasn't leaving until it did. The farmhouse sat on the edge of a fading pasture, its paint chipped and its porch sagging with age. Emily walked through the front door slowly, the hinges groaning like an old man clearing his throat. The scent hit her first, aged wood, dried tobacco, and the faintest trace of her father's cologne. She hadn't stepped foot inside this house since she was 17, and now every corner seemed haunted by silence. The furniture was covered in white cloths, frozen in time, as if the house itself had been holding its breath since Samuel Aldridge died. She wandered through the living room, running her fingers across the back of the worn-out sofa. A photo frame still sat on the mantel, dusty but intact. It was a picture of her and her father, taken during the county fair, one of the last days she remembered him smiling. But that image only deepened the ache in her chest. It didn't make sense. Why would a man who once held her so close die without saying goodbye? Without even leaving a note? It wasn't until she entered his study that she felt something shift. The room smelled different, colder, more closed off. The desk was untouched, drawers still locked, as if Samuel had expected to return. Emily knelt by the wooden floor, noticing a loose board under the old rug. Her heart quickened. She tugged at it, pried it up, and found a small tin box hidden beneath. Inside, a folded letter, yellowed with time, sealed in an envelope with her name on it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was handwritten, shaky, but unmistakably his. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means you've come back. And it means I didn't get the chance to explain everything I should have when I was alive." Her breath caught. The words poured out, apologies, confessions, pieces of a story she never knew. Samuel wrote about a man he used to be, the choices he regretted, and a past with Midnight that went deeper than training. He confessed that Midnight had once belonged to a violent rancher named Arthur Blackwell, a man who used the horse in illegal rodeo circuits, pushing him to near death. Samuel had rescued Midnight in secret, hiding him on Evelyn's land, and raised him like a ghost, never registering him, never speaking his name in public. "I protected him," the letter read. "But in doing so I kept him, and you, tangled in my shame." Tears blurred Emily's vision. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He had been protecting something. Someone. She folded the letter slowly, pressing it to her chest. In that moment, everything shifted. Midnight wasn't just her father's horse. He was a living part of the past Samuel tried to atone for. But as Emily sat there in the quiet of that room, A knock echoed from the front porch. Heavy. Measured. Someone else had come looking. And they weren't just there to reminisce. The knock came again, slower this time, more deliberate. Emily rose to her feet, slipping the letter into her jacket pocket before moving toward the front door. Through the warped glass, she could make out the silhouette of a tall man in a long coat and wide-brimmed hat, standing stiffly on the porch. Her fingers hovered over the doorknob for a moment, heart pounding. Then, with a steady breath, she opened the door. "Evenin', Miss Aldridge," the man said with a slow, southern drawl. His eyes were a piercing gray, and though his face was unfamiliar, there was something about him that unsettled her. "Name's Clinton Blackwell. I believe you have something that belongs to my family." The name hit her like a cold wind. Blackwell. It was the name from her father's letter. The man who had once owned Midnight. The man her father had feared. Emily narrowed her eyes. "I don't think I do," she said carefully. "Whatever you're looking for, you're not gonna find it here." Clinton gave a thin smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "I think you know better than that. That horse out there, he ain't just some stray your daddy picked up. He's the last piece of a legacy my grandfather built. Midnight's promise was bred and broken on Blackwell land. And now that Samuel Aldridge is gone, it's time he came home." Emily stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. "Your grandfather abused that horse. Rode him nearly to death. My father saved him. That animal doesn't belong to your family. Not anymore." Clinton's gaze hardened. "You think you can rewrite history with good intentions, Miss Aldridge? My family's name still carries weight in this county. And if you think you can waltz back in after all these years and keep what ain't yours, you're dead wrong." She didn't flinch, didn't step back. "Then go ahead," she said, her voice low. "Try and take him." The standoff stretched between them, thick as the Texas heat. Finally, Clinton tipped his hat. "This ain't over," he said quietly, before turning and walking down the steps, boots echoing against the old boards. Emily watched him disappear into the dark, her fists clenched at her sides. Back inside, the letter in her pocket felt heavier than ever. Her father had warned her that the past would come knocking. She just hadn't expected it to wear a last name like Blackwell. Midnight wasn't just part of a broken legacy. He was at the center of a storm that hadn't fully passed. And as the shadows lengthened across the fields outside, Emily knew that something had been set in motion. Something bigger than her. The fight for Midnight had begun. And it was no longer just about a horse, it was about the truth, the land, and a history some folks would do anything to bury. The next morning broke with a heavy sky, thick clouds rolling over Redstone like a warning. Emily stood near the fence line behind Evelyn Calloway's house, watching Midnight graze in the pasture. He moved with cautious grace, still alert, but no longer wild-eyed. Something had changed between them, like an unspoken agreement was slowly forming. Still, Clinton Blackwell's visit lingered in her mind like a thorn. His words, his threat, and more than anything, his surname. Inside the kitchen, Evelyn stirred a pot of coffee with steady hands. "I heard about your visitor," she said, sliding a mug across the counter. "Blackwells don't come around unless they want something they don't deserve." Her voice held no fear, only experience. Arthur Blackwell built his name on cruelty. Land, horses, people, it didn't matter. And Clinton? He's a spitting image of him. Same pride. Same poison. Emily sat at the table, fingers wrapped around the warm mug. Why didn't anyone stop him back then? "My dad, you..." "Sheriff Hale." Evelyn sighed deeply, sitting across from her. "We tried. But back then, Arthur owned half the county and scared the rest. Your father took the only stand that mattered. He stole Midnight from that hellhole and disappeared him. Paid for it, too. Sheriff Hale knew, but looking the other way was the only justice we could manage. Midnight wasn't just a horse, he was evidence. And your father? He carried that burden alone. The weight of it all settled on Emily's shoulders like a lead blanket. She had always wondered why her father had become so distant, so heavy in his later years. Now she understood, it wasn't just guilt. It was fear. Fear that one day, the past would come for what it thought it owned. And now it had. That afternoon, Sheriff Wade Hale arrived at the ranch, his truck kicking up gravel as it pulled in. He stepped out with his hat in hand and eyes weary from years of balancing law with loyalty. "We need to talk," he said, motioning her toward the porch. Emily followed him, every step feeling like the page of an old book being turned. "I got a visit from Clinton this morning," he began. "He's got papers, claims of bloodline ownership on Midnight through his grandfather's estate. He's filed with the county clerk." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're saying he's trying to take him legally?" Wade nodded slowly. "It's not just about the horse, Emily. It's about stirring up ghosts your father buried with his silence. If Blackwell wins this, he'll turn Midnight into a trophy, and your father into a thief." Emily stared out at the field where Midnight stood, unaware of the storm circling him. "Then I'll fight it," she said. "I'll fight for him, and for my father." Wade tipped his hat. "Then you better be ready. Because the Blackwells don't lose easy, and they don't fight fair." Rain began to fall that evening, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the tin roof of the barn like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Emily worked late, her boots sinking into the damp earth as she hauled hay and checked the stalls. Midnight stood quietly in his corner, watching her with that steady gaze. She'd started talking to him more. Soft words, little stories from her childhood. He didn't answer, of course, but he listened. And that was more than most people ever did. Inside the house, Buckland Rourke sat in the parlor with a faded journal spread across his lap. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting shadows on the weathered lines of his face. When Emily entered, soaked and tired, he didn't look up right away. "Your father wrote everything down," he said, his voice gruff. Even when he stopped talking to people, he kept writing. Emily stepped closer, eyeing the worn leather cover. "I didn't know he kept a journal." "Neither did I," Buck said, flipping a page slowly. "Evelyn found it in the attic, buried under some old tack boxes. Could have been there for years. He handed it to her. Thought you should be the one to read it." She sat by the fire, her fingers trembling as she opened to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable, Samuel Aldridge's tight, slanted script. Most entries were brief, but full of emotion. Notes about training sessions, whispered regrets, and references to Echo. That was what he used to call Midnight, a nickname he never spoke aloud. In one entry, dated a few months before his death, he wrote, "Echo trusts no one now. I don't blame him. I took his fear and wore it like armor. I wish I'd done more than save him. I wish I'd freed him." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she read. Her father hadn't just rescued Midnight, he'd seen himself in that horse. They were both survivors of someone else's cruelty, both broken in ways the world couldn't see. He had carried that weight until it crushed him. And now, that same darkness was reaching for her. Flipping through the final pages, she found something else: receipts, scribbled notes, and a ledger page signed by Arthur Blackwell himself. It detailed illegal rodeo activity, unregistered horse ownership, and a payment made to silence a witness. Buck leaned over her shoulder. "That's the break right there. If that signature's real, it proves your father didn't steal Midnight. He was covering for a crime no one dared expose." Emily stood abruptly, the journal pressed to her chest. "This changes everything." Buck nodded. "It'll make you a target." She looked out the rain-speckled window, past the pasture and into the dark where secrets still lingered. Then let them come. Because now, she had more than a memory to defend, she had proof. And in Redstone County, truth was more dangerous than bullets. The wind picked up the next morning, hard and hot, carrying with it the smell of storm-soaked earth and tension. Emily stood near the paddock, watching Midnight pace along the fence line. He wasn't agitated. He was alert, restless, as if he too felt the shift in the air, the weight of the coming confrontation. Emily had barely slept. The ledger sat on the kitchen table, open to the page that could change everything. It was no longer just her father's truth, it was evidence. And she knew it wouldn't stay a secret for long. By noon, Sheriff Wade Hale showed up again, the brim of his hat pulled low and dust clinging to his boots. He took one look at the papers Emily had laid out and let out a long sigh. "You realize this puts you dead center in a legal firestorm, right?" he said. "The Blackwells won't take kindly to their name being dragged through the mud, especially not with something this concrete." Emily folded her arms. "Then let them be angry. I'm not letting them rewrite history to fit their narrative." Wade scratched his jaw, clearly weighing his next words. "I checked with the county office this morning. Clinton's already filed a motion to take temporary custody of Midnight until the dispute's settled. If he gets a sympathetic judge, that horse could be gone before the weekend." He paused. "This ledger helps, but it ain't enough by itself. Not if they argue forgery." "I'll testify," Emily said without hesitation, "about what my father wrote, what he did. I'll tell the court what he told me in that letter." Wade nodded slowly. "Then you better be ready for what comes with that. You'll be put on trial just as much as the Blackwells. They'll dig into your life, your past, your family. They'll twist everything they can. That kind of battle doesn't just leave bruises, it leaves scars." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Evelyn Calloway found Emily on the porch, staring out at the fields in silence. "You remind me of your father more every day," she said softly. "He stood alone too. Until he didn't." Emily looked over at her. "What do you mean?" Evelyn gave a knowing smile. "There are people in this town who remember what Arthur Blackwell did. Some are still afraid, but others? They're just waiting for someone brave enough to speak first." She placed a hand gently on Emily's shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone." Just then, the sound of tires crunching gravel echoed from the road. A black SUV came into view, moving slow, too slow. It stopped just outside the gate, engine humming. The windows were tinted. No one got out. Emily narrowed her eyes. A message had been delivered. One without words, but clear as day. They knew she had the ledger. And they were watching. The black SUV was gone by morning, but its presence lingered like smoke in the walls. Emily didn't speak of it, but the tension in her jaw, the way she double-checked the barn doors, and how she slept with her boots near the bed said enough. She wasn't scared, but she was ready. Midnight was calm that day, unusually so, following her around the paddock like a shadow. Maybe he sensed it too. The pressure, the danger, the way the world was starting to tighten around them both. Buckland Rourke sat sharpening a knife on the porch steps, his gaze never far from the dirt road. "I seen that SUV last night," he muttered. "Didn't like the way it idled. That ain't curiosity, that's a warning." Emily crouched beside Midnight, brushing his flank with slow, practiced strokes. "They want me scared," she said flatly. "They want me to give up before this even gets to court." Buck spat into the grass. "That family don't fight clean. They never did. But you got more on your side than you think." Just after noon, Reverend Paul Merrick stopped by. He hadn't come for prayer. Instead, he brought with him an old binder and a name Emily hadn't heard before: Walter Griggs, a rodeo medic who worked circuits back when Arthur Blackwell was active. "Walter's still alive," Merrick said. "Living in a care home outside Houston. Evelyn told me what you found. I figured you'd want someone who saw it with his own eyes." Emily's hands tightened around the binder. Inside were scans of rodeo rosters, injury reports, and old grainy photos. One of them showed a young, terrified Midnight mid-buck, bleeding from his mouth, Arthur Blackwell gripping the reins like a man possessed. "These were never reported," she whispered. "Course not," Merrick said. "Back then, men like Arthur made sure nothing reached the light. But now, people are finally willing to talk." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Truth's like a fire, Emily. It burns clean, but it doesn't always spare." That night, as she tucked the binder next to the ledger, she found herself staring at the small flame in the oil lamp by the window. The wind had picked up again, rattling the panes like fingers tapping glass. She didn't know who would show up next, or what they'd be willing to do to silence her. Outside, Midnight stirred restlessly in the barn, ears twitching, eyes darting toward the trees. Emily stepped out with her flashlight, scanning the shadows. And that's when she saw it, spray-painted in red across the side of the barn. "Thieves burn." Her heart dropped. She ran her hand over the letters, the paint still wet. This wasn't just a message. It was a line in the sand. The Blackwells had made their move. Now it was war. The courthouse in Redstone was small. Old bricks, faded flag, and a single creaky ceiling fan that had probably been turning since the 60s. But that morning, it felt like the center of the world. The pew-like benches were packed with locals. Some whispered. Some avoided eye contact. Others sat forward, eager to see the Aldridge girl face the Blackwells. Emily walked in with her shoulders squared, the ledger tucked under one arm, and her father's journal in the other. Behind her, Buck and Evelyn flanked her like quiet sentinels. Across the aisle, Clinton Blackwell sat in a tailored suit, smug and confident. He didn't even look at Emily as she passed. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed man from Houston named Dalton Briggs, stood ready with folders stacked like ammunition. To them, this wasn't about justice. It was about legacy, image, and power. But for Emily, it was about truth, and the life of a horse that had already survived too much. The judge, a weathered man named Harold Sutton, called the hearing to order. "Let's keep this civil," he said, though everyone knew that was wishful thinking. The first arguments were dry: property law, estate claims, paperwork. Then Dalton Briggs stood, holding up a deed. "Midnight's promise was never legally transferred," he said. "Ownership, by default, returns to the Blackwell estate." Emily rose calmly. "Your Honor," she began, "my father rescued that horse from illegal abuse. I have the ledger to prove Arthur Blackwell paid off officials and entered Midnight in unauthorized rodeos." She handed the worn document to the clerk. "I also have testimony from a rodeo medic, Walter Griggs, confirming Midnight's condition and treatment during that time." There was a hush in the courtroom. Briggs objected, claiming hearsay. The judge skimmed the pages, then looked to Emily. "You're saying your father risked prison to protect this horse?" "Yes," she replied, "because no one else would." After a pause, Judge Sutton nodded. "Then I want to hear from this Walter Griggs." They called him in by speakerphone. His voice was frail but clear. "I treated that horse in '98. He had a split tongue, cracked ribs, and burns from illegal electric spurs. Arthur Blackwell told me to patch him up and keep quiet." Clinton shifted in his seat for the first time. The final blow came when Emily read aloud from her father's journal. "I didn't steal Midnight. I saved him. Not for glory, but because no one else would. If the truth comes out, let it. I'd rather be remembered as a thief than a coward." A silence followed. The judge looked at Clinton, Then back to Emily. "I'll issue a formal ruling within 48 hours, he said. "But I'll say this now, what your father did wasn't theft, it was mercy." As the courtroom emptied, Clinton brushed past Emily, his jaw tight. "You think this ends here?" he muttered. Emily met his stare. "No. But this is where your lies start falling apart." Outside, thunder rumbled over Redstone. The storm had broken. But the fight wasn't finished yet. 2 days later, the ruling came. Sheriff Wade Hale handed Emily the official letter as she stood beside Midnight's paddock, the autumn wind rustling the tall grass around them. She unfolded the paper slowly, her hands steady, her breath caught between hope and memory. The judge's decision was clear. The court recognized Samuel Aldridge's actions as a protective intervention, not theft. Ownership of Midnight's promise was officially granted to Emily Grace Aldridge. She read the final line twice, just to make sure. For the first time in years, the past had spoken, and this time it had chosen truth. The townsfolk began showing up that afternoon. Some came with kind words, others with silence heavy with regret. People who had looked the other way back then, now looked her in the eye. Evelyn Calloway stood beside Emily on the porch, arms crossed and eyes proud. "Told you," she said with a half-smile. "This town remembers more than it lets on. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to wake it up." Later, Buck handed Emily a small box from the attic. Inside were items she had forgotten even existed. Her father's rodeo belt buckle, a photo of him holding her as a child, and a sealed envelope with her name written in his rough handwriting. She opened it carefully. "If you're reading this, Emmy," it began, "then you've done what I couldn't, face the world without flinching. I carried shame because I thought I had to. But you carried truth. And that's heavier, but it's honest." She sat on the edge of the bed, eyes full, chest aching with something that wasn't quite sorrow. It was closure. Not perfect, not painless, but real. She folded the letter and tucked it into the journal with the others. Her father was gone, but his voice, his truth, was finally heard. Not just by her, but by everyone who needed to remember what courage looked like. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Emily led Midnight out into the open field. No halter, no reins, just trust. He followed her without hesitation, the wind lifting his mane like a banner. She turned to face him, her voice soft. "You're free now, you know that?" Midnight blinked, ears flicking forward, still and silent like he understood. She stepped back, and after a long pause, the horse took off at a steady gallop, powerful, proud, and finally unchained. From the fence, Buck, Evelyn, and even Sheriff Hale watched as the black stallion ran into the fading light. There were no more court battles. No more secrets. Just a girl, her father's legacy, and a horse that had outlived every chain ever thrown on him. Emily exhaled and closed her eyes. Not everything broken stays broken. Some things survive. Some things run free. And some stories finally find their ending.